Our speaker today for this BBL lecture is Dr. Kiki Karoglou, an associate curator at the Metropolitan Museum in the Department of Greek and Roman Art. She received her BA and MA degrees from Athens University and her PhD from Princeton in classical art and archaeology. She is a specialist in ancient Greek art with a particular interest in sculpture, pottery, and ancient Greek myth and religion. She has taught at the University of Toronto and at Princeton and has held fellowships and internships at the Getty Research Institute, the Princeton Art Museum, the American School of Classical Studies, and the Acropolis Museum in Athens. She has participated in archaeological excavations throughout the Mediterranean and has published widely, including a book on painted plaques dedicated in Attic sanctuaries. At the Metropolitan Museum, she collaborated on the 2016 exhibition, Pergamon and the Hellenistic Kingdoms of the Ancient World. And this year, she curated the exhibition, Dangerous Beauty, Medusa in Classical Art, the subject of a Metropolitan Museum bulletin, which is now sold out, but you can look at a copy here after the lecture. This is the topic she will address today. Please join me in welcoming Kiki Karoglou.
Thank you all for coming today. I'm very excited to be speaking to you, and I'm very grateful to Elizabeth for the kind invitation to be here, and to Laura for her kind assistance with all the logistical details. So I'm jumping into the presentation of the show, and then I allowed some time, of course, for Q&A, and we can discuss it further. Beginning in the 5th century, Medusa, the monstrous gorgon whose gaze turned men to stone, as you know, underwent a gradual transformation from grotesque to beautiful as she became more anthropomorphic and feminine. A similar shift happened in the presentations of other female hybrids, these half or semi-human beings, such as sphinxes, sirens, and the sea monster Scylla. The metamorphosis of these terrifying figures of the underworld and death was a consequence of the idealizing humanism of Greek art of the classical period. Beauty, understood as harmony and ideal proportions, was a hallmark, as you know, of the classical style that influenced not only the representation of the human body, especially the male body, but also that of mythological beings. Yet, even when they are beautiful, these terrifying hybrids still have a dangerous power. Medusa's gaze, the siren's song, and the Sphinx's riddle are all extremely dangerous. So, drawn primarily from the Met's collection, this exhibition features a wide range of works dating from the 6th century BC to the 20th century, from ancient Greek armor, drinking cups, funerary urns, neoclassical to neoclassical cameos, and modern fashion by Versace. The exhibition is accompanied, as you know, by the winter 2018 issue of the Metropolitan Museum of Art Bulletin, and overall is a testament to the extraordinary holdings of the Greek and Roman department, specifically, and the encyclopedic scope of the museum's collections. The majority of Greek hybrids were imagined as female, blending the human female form with elements from animals such as snakes, fish, dogs, and birds. These hybrids symbolized all that was alien and strange, what we call the other. At the same time, in a society that exalted the male citizen, the feminization of monsters served to demonize women. I'm not going to go over the details of the myth. I'm sure you're familiar with it. Just briefly, the three Gorgon sisters, Stheno, Evriali, and Medusa, were terrible monsters who lived in the Western Ocean that was considered the frontiers of the inhabited world in antiquity. They had large heads with glaring eyes, lolling tongues, brazen hands, tusks, and golden wings. And sometimes their hair was entwined with snakes. Whoever looked at their hideous faces would turn instantly to stone. And as you know, Medusa was the only mortal of the three sisters, and she's the most famous because of her role in the legend of the hero Perseus. As you see on your slide, in archaic Greek art, Medusa is depicted both as a full female figure, you see in this applique in the exhibition, and as a severed head, what we call a gorgonion. And this is an iconic one in the Met's collection. But always, the archaic gorgon is frontal, full face, glaring at the viewer. On this slide, on this Attic black figure Lycithos, still late archaic, you see the action that follows Medusa's decapitation in full swing. You see this Perseus. You see Pegasus, the winged horse that springs from her neck while her body lies on the ground, gushing blood. At the same time, Perseus, wearing the cape of Hades that made him invisible, it's a funny rendering here, escapes, carrying Medusa's head in his special pouch, the special power pouch called the Kivises. However, Medusa was progressively transformed into an attractive young woman. In fact, this peliki at the Met, this red figure peliki, preserves one of the earliest representations of the beautiful Medusa in Greek art. The Gorgon, as you see, sleeps peacefully on a hillside. As Perseus approaches, sickle in hand, and you can see it here, and grabs her by the hair. He looks away to avoid her deadly gaze while Athena, the goddess Athena, stands by. The act of beheading a sleeping, beautiful maiden seems rather unheroic, however, and it is unclear whether this scene was intended to provoke sympathy for the monster or laughter at the hero, perhaps as a theme of a satyr play. Medusa's head usually occupies the center of Athena's aegis, sometimes the seal, but the aegis, as you know, is a protective breastplate that was made of goat skin that was fringed with snakes. And you see the Gorgon's head. This piece is in the show. This is another example from Met vase, 5th century vase. In the late classical period, the trend towards humanization and feminization intensified, while the violence of the archaic representations of her death returned. We see here, this is not in the show, but I wanted to show it to you. So the development of the theme, this is another peliki, 4th century one, in the Hermitage, that shows, again, Medusa, this time without wings and naked from the waist up, with an agonized expression on her face and dramatically gesturing, pleading for her life, as Perseus decapitates her. Both an aggressor and a victim, she became a tragic figure, as is evidenced by these Attic representations of her death. So this is a Met example of this. Centuries later, Medusa's decapitation still remained popular, as you see, for example, Carracci's fresco in the Camerino of the Palazzo Farnese in Rome, or, not in the show, or the 18th century etching by Runciman, included in the exhibition, that likewise attempts to provoke pity in the viewer for the monster's impending demise. The Roman poet Ovid, in his Metamorphoses, revised Medusa's background, it was common in that time, to explain why she was the only Gorgon that had snakes in her hair. Ovid tells us that when she was a beautiful young woman, Medusa was originally a beautiful young woman and was raped by Poseidon inside the temple of Athena. As a punishment, Athena transformed her into a horrible-looking monster with snaky hair. This transition from a tale of a hero combating a monster to the sad story of the beautiful maiden turned into a monster affected the artistic representations of the myth over time. The Gorgonion itself also underwent this transformation from grotesque to beautiful. This transition is apparent in a variety of media represented in the exhibition, and it reflects its presence, its ubiquitous presence in antiquity. And you see it very clearly on this series of antefixes, the terracotta tiles that line the edges of temples and other buildings in antiquity. And I only have 3 examples in the show, but you can see starting from the 6th century down, going to the latest example, the 3rd century BC. I mean, I don't have to explain it further. You can also see that I have the various paintings in the show that show this clearly, as these 2 fine South Italian greaves, where you see the Gorgonion is placed at the uppermost part that protected the warrior's kneecap. The Gorgonion was a very fitting subject for arms and armor in general, because was thought to have protective, defensive powers and to provoke fear in the opponent. Right? So I'm putting here as an example that tradition continues on in the Renaissance and further. On the Growl's masterwork, the helmet in the Med, you see this graceful mermaid-like siren holding a Gorgonion, a Medusa head by the hair. A fearsome Gorgonion, as you see, covers the entire surface of Achilles in this terracotta relief fragment from Attica in the show, while a beautiful version is emblazoned on the shield of this Cypriot terracotta figurine that was actually in the storms, and I brought it up for the show. And another example, this shield all'antica, this beautiful French ornamental shield, also shows the same motif of the frightful Medusa. Medusa was also an appropriate image for the taunt of drinking cups. And it was very popular for that reason. In some early representations, you see her still very masculine and forbidding, a full figure in her kneel-out pose. But more frequently, she's depicted as a head or a mask. And the assumption is that upon drinking the contents of the cup, the wine, the symposiast would find the face of the Gorgon glaring back at him, warning him, as if warning him about the ill effects of too much wine. In the Hellenistic period, you see this beautiful Gorgonion in high relief replaced the painted earlier grotesque examples, but it continues the tradition. Now, the famed Medusa Rodanini in Munich, named after Palazzo Rodanini in Rome when it was first exhibited, is one of the most intriguing sculptures of classical antiquity. Sometimes scholars think, not so much nowadays, but before, that it copies a 5th century creation by Phidias, perhaps an emblem on the seal device, or emblem or seal device of one of his statues. As you see in the show, this is my signature piece, you see the type of the Rodanini on this exquisite chariot pole finial that demonstrates the popularity of the type in Roman decorative arts. However, beautiful Gorgonia did not become common in Greek art until the end of the 4th century BC. They adorned cinerary urns, as you see these 2 fine examples in the show. Again, the Rodanini type. Yeah. and painted in the 3/4 on the seal there. Or they were among the frequently pictured in the Roman mosaic floors. And I'm showing you here one of the most spectacular examples that was recently discovered in the outskirts of Rome and once decorated the dining room of the house. Gorgonia, of course, were among the stock decorative motifs of frescoes, or Roman frescoes, usually employed in secondary panels or wall ceilings, and we have a wall painting fragment in the collection that I included in the show. Of course, the myth of Perseus was a popular subject in Roman art, but not exactly this story, mostly the encounter with Andromeda and that part of the myth. But we do have this very interesting miniature fresco from Stabie with Perseus holding the head of Medusa that shows him very in a triumphant fashion. So he realizes now that he possesses the power not only of her deadly gaze, but also the power of her miraculous blood, which could both heal and poison. Now the villa was explored, the villa at Stabie is the Villa San Marco, where this painting is found. It was explored in 1750, 1754, in the year 1750, 1754, and that's a wild guess. Perhaps this fresco was an inspiration for Canova's celebrated statue at the Vatican, Perseus with the head of Medusa, because it's strikingly similar, the composition. As you know, the second version of that statue is now at the Met, and it's a centerpiece of the Esda's Petri Court. Now, this plaster cast was made by Canova's studio and was shipped to the Met together with the statue of Medusa. And we cleaned it and I now have it in the show. It's very interesting to see that this rod here is original to the piece, so it's not a modern, a contemporary edition. It's a 19th century part of the cast. And this was how it was carried around. We can talk more about it further later on. Gorgons, sphinxes, and sirens adorned the coins of many Greek cities, two examples here, and were widely employed, of course, in luxury arts and jewelry, especially. Various examples and so on. The beautiful Medusa in particular was very popular on cameos and gemstones. As you see these Hellenistic and Roman examples, that were functioned mostly as personal amulets. And it was featured in neoclassical cameos and other decorated European arts as this superb onyx cameo, or the famous Pistrucci red jasper cameo that's in the show. This actually is also not on display usually. We discovered them in their storerooms. Now, since the Renaissance, Medusa is represented with serpents in place of human hair. An iconographic invention that is credited by Vasari to a young Leonardo da Vinci. So the story is that he painted a Medusa so frightful that he spooked his father. Of course, it doesn't survive, but for many years this was thought to be Leonardo's work, and now it's attributed to an anonymous Flemish painter. Equally haunting is a well-known Medusa on Caravaggio's painted seal in Florence. Again, you see the same motif, snakes instead of hair. Of course, a modern recasting of the beautiful Medusa is the logo of Versace, the house Versace. In 1996, in an interview that he gave, Gianni explained the reason why he chose Medusa to be his trademark. He said, Medusa means seduction, dangerous attraction, sense of history, classicism. So the black dress on the left is one of the designer's most recognizable looks. And as you see, the gilded safety pins they are statistically placed in spots that transfix the viewer's gaze. While in contrast, the medallions on the leather straps of this bondage-themed dress, also in the show, have Medusa screaming in anguish, perhaps mirroring the harrowing moment of her victims' deaths. As you see here on this painting, Medusa is represented in the likeness of Kate Moss, the British fashion model, in Frank Moore's painting, To Die For. Now, this painting was commissioned by Gianni Versace, but was completed after the designer's murder in the summer of 1997, so he never actually saw it done, finished. A poignant reference to the complex relationship between fashion and art, this painting came to symbolize the violence against this Italian fashion icon whose life ended tragically. Now we move on to our next friend, the Sphinx. As you know, the Sphinx is a mythological creature with a lion's body and a human face that originated in Egypt and is known from the Bronze Age on in various forms throughout the Mediterranean. The Greeks represented her as a female lion, a lioness, with a woman's head, and often carved the stone on funerary monuments, so her main function was funeral. In classical times, her femininity is emphasized with necklaces, elaborate diadems, and long coiffed hair. And I saw you here this example from Cyprus that's in the show. In the Hellenistic period, of course, Sphinx continued to have a funerary function, but they were relegated in a more decorative role, usually as part of the architectural ornamentation of the monument, as you see on Tarentine Funeral in Nioskoi. I have this example in the show of a capital with a two-bodied Sphinx. Along with the Gorgon sirens, the Sphinxes were often used were integrated into bronze or terracotta vessels and other implements. 3 examples in the show. And later on in the Roman world, the image became, again, even more decorative and appeared on marble figural capitals like this one in the exhibition, and as well as furniture, especially table legs. And this is a very fine example in Copenhagen. I was briefly here for the opening of the Greek and Roman galleries. This is what we call in Greek trapezophorus, so it's table leg. Many late archaic and classical vases show a Sphinx chasing a young man or clutching him as prey. One of them is this Kilix in the museum. In this scenes, the Sphinx combines the roles of the Bronze Age demon who snaps the corpses of dead warriors from battle, and the lover who passionately pursues handsome youths only to tear them apart. And I'm showing you here an example at the Getty. You can see, if you look closely, she draws her claws into the young man's, dead man's heart. Sometimes the addition of an altar and a column, as on these canthars, identifies the scene as that happening in a sanctuary. But it's not always clear whether these scenes are representations of the generic death demon or refer specifically to the most famous Sphinx, of course, the Sphinx in the Oedipus legend. The image of this man-eating Sphinx finds its most dramatic expression in a pair of Roman marble statue groups made out of grey worky. One of them is reconstructed from fragments in Vienna that come from Ephesus, each showing a Sphinx attacking a young man. The ingenious composition seen in this, as I said, reconstructed group masterfully captures the tension between eroticism and violence. The theme of the ravishing Sphinx was explored anew by symbolist artists in the 19th century who used figures from Greek myths and biblical stories to populate their mysterious dreamlike world. It's highly eroticized in this famous painting by Moreau at the Met called Oedipus and the Sphinx, which itself was inspired by the namesake painting in the Louvre by Ingres, which you see here on your left. And I represented that painting in the exhibition by the Gaillard etching. So as you see, Ingres painted a very feminine half Sphinx, but also very menacing at the same time, set in this ominous, cavernous landscape. While in Moreau's paintings, she takes center stage, where she's highly feminized, but rather vapid looking, as she clothes Oedipus' chest and genitals. The allegorical potency of the Sphinx is aptly demonstrated by Karawokke's public art installation in the now defunct Dominus Sugar refinery in Brooklyn. The colossal sugar-coated white sculpture is a powerful political and racially charged symbol of the dark legacy of the sugar and slave trade. In Homer's Odyssey, Circe, the sorceress Circe, warns Odysseus that if he hears the singing of the sirens, he will never return home. For they beguile men to their death with the sweetness of the song. The sirens' fate was determined by an oracle, was to live until a mortal survived their deadly call. Of course, the song was very beautiful. It was the ultimate music, and that's why Odysseus wanted to hear it. So he ordered his men to bind him to the mast of his ship and to put wax in their ears. As you know the story. Odysseus was able to listen to the song, and all the crew survived. As a result, the sirens drowned themselves. And this is the early depiction of their suicide in this famous vase in the British Museum. Homer does not describe the physical appearance of the sirens, only gives us their name. But in Greek art, they were represented as hybrid creatures with human heads and the body and claws of a bird of prey. So in the archaic period, were shown armless, and the gender was still ambiguous. As you see on this example in the show, this tripod coffin, the Sphinx has a beard. So they were sometimes represented as female, sometimes as male. By the 5th century BC, and that goes back to what we're talking about, what happens in the classical art of the 5th century, the beard had disappeared, and sirens were represented only as females. So they progressively transformed into avian-bodied females with fully developed human chest and arms. And the arms, of course, are essential to their portrayal as musicians, as you see here on the skelex. And most of the times, sometimes they're shown singing. It's miniature Lekythos here. She has an open mouth. If you look closely, you'll see. But most of the times, they play a variety of instruments. So in the late classical period, in the 4th century, the femininity is further enhanced by the jewelry they wear, and of course they develop the objects they carry, and they have full female breasts. This is best an example in this one. On classical Attic grave stelae and funerary statues, the sirens are portrayed as empathetic mourners, with their enchanting song becoming a lament. Usually, in the 5th century, they're relegated to the other acroteria here. In this case, Sphinx is all the center acroteria of the stele, like here. And I'm showing you here these two funerary statues from Athens. So this theme of the sad, beautiful siren is rendered in a very imaginative way in Dufy's woodcut, in the song, as you see here on the left. So as two beautiful sirens flying over the sea, naked from the waist up, with long, luxurious hair, and bears 4 legs instead of arms, as well as fishtails. This is an intermediate type between the classical bird woman and the post-classical and more familiar to us representation of sirens as mermaids, as you see in the Draper painting. And I couldn't resist doing this. I mean, you know, the bronze sculpture of the Renaissance in the Met, and of course, this is the famous Starbucks logo, a copy of that type, the mermaid siren. So it still resonates in a way. Odysseus and his crew, as you know, also encountered Scylla, a sea monster who, along with Charybdis, terrorized ancient sailors. The poet tells us that Scylla had 12 legs and 6 long necks with ghastly heads. Its head had 3 rows of teeth, and their breath smelled like death. But this horrible monster was even the gods feared of her, as the poet says, yelled like a skylax, which is the ancient Greek word for puppy. So imagine the contrast. So with these long necks, she snatched tailors from the ships passing by her cave and devoured them. Now, if we go back to our friend Ovid in his Metamorphoses, likewise, he relates how Scylla was once a very beautiful maiden. And the envious sorceress Circe poisoned her bathing pool and transformed her into the monster that we now know, transformed her waist and groin into a pack of snarling dogs. You see them here. Scylla was thus stripped of her sexuality and was condemned to a life of solitude, sending countless sailors to the watery deaths. However, in contrast to the other monsters, the earliest Arctic surviving representations of Scylla that we have come from the 5th century BC, so nothing in the archaic period. And they show here, and I'm showing you this fine example in the Met, as a tripartite creature with the upper body of an alluring woman, a fishy tail or dragon tail, and 4 parts of barking dogs emerging at the hip. So you can see the dogs again. Usually grasping debris from the shipwrecks, such as broken oars, as in this case, or rudders, she is poised to attack her next unsuspecting victim. Now, scholars interpret Scylla as a semantic symbol that unites the 3 concepts of sea, dog, and woman. Thus, Scylla is seen as expressing anxieties about the navigational hazards of the sea, and most of these female creatures actually are related to the dangers of the sea. The human fear of being devoured, as well as the ancient Greek male's dread of female lust and aggression, and their opposite, namely untamed virginity. This connection between horror and beauty outlived antiquity, fascinating and inspiring artists through the centuries. Along with the beautiful Scylla, Medusa foreshadows the idea of the seductive yet threatening female that emerges in the late 19th century in reaction to the expanding role of women in public life and their demands for equality. This trope of the attractive but dangerous, distracted woman had already been featured prominently, as you know, in Romantic poetry, which also used mythical or biblical females as paradigms. In the 19th century, Lilith, a night demon and Adam's first and insubordinate wife in Jewish folklore, was conflated with Lamia, the fearsome baby snatcher of Greek myth. Unfortunately, no representations of her survive. So in Rossetti's 1866 oil painting, Lady Lilith, replicated in this watercolor in the show, the artist imagined Lilith as an emasculating sensual beauty. In a handwritten label attached to the original frame of the painting, Rossetti quotes a passage from Goethe's Faust, in which Mephistopheles warns Faust of Lilith's dangerous beauty, especially her ensnaring hair. As in the case of Medusa, a woman's threatening nature manifests itself in her hair and her gaze. In contrast to Rossetti's figure engaged in narcissistic contemplation, the bare-breasted woman with these red, disheveled long locks and emerald Greek eyes, in this masterful print by Munch, looks blankly out. Munch's erotic icon floats in the void as if frozen out of time. Though not pointing directly at the viewer, her hypnotic, alien stare is reminiscent of Medusa's petrifying gaze. Today, Medusa persists as a symbol of fatal beauty and dangerous sexuality. We see, for example, Rihanna on the left, styled as Medusa on the cover of the British GQ magazine, or Uma Thurman playing Medusa in the popular movie Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief, retelling and popularizing the Perseus myth. An insidious usage of the iconography of Medusa vilifies powerful women, especially in politics. As you might know, during the heated 2016 presidential election, Cellini's famous bronze sculpture in Florence, Perseus with the head of Medusa that you see on the left, was appropriated by Trump's campaign. You can see Trump as the hero, Perseus, and Hillary Clinton as the severed head of Medusa. Of course, Hillary is not on, his company is not the only one. And here we see, you see the face of Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, superimposed on Caravaggio's seal. So progressing from the magnificently monstrous to the terrifyingly beautiful, these female hybrids visualize a conflicting view of femininity. One that is seemingly alluring, but with a sinister or dark, threatening underside. The process of feminization was a hallmark of the mythical and artistic imagination of the classical period, by artists who humanized and beautified the most hideous and repugnant of all, the Gorgon Medusa. Much like Medusa's gaze, the power of their art is transformative and enduring. Thank you. I will happy to take questions, and actually I'll sit, or maybe I'll stand, if you want to go back to the slides.
talk a bit more about the plaster head of Medusa with
The cast?
handle? Yeah. That's all. Was it meant to be like?
Yeah, because it was an interesting story. It was published. Canova, as you see, if you remember and I had the drawing of the Perseus, the Vatican Perseus in the show, but I didn't picture it here. The Vatican piece has a strap between the two legs. This is a more daring, more ornate composition, and he was afraid that this might be too heavy for the extended arm to bear. So in case that accident happened, they had to replace it with a cast, and then use the actual marble head to play around and put a. Actually, they did that. They tried to do it. Put a candle inside and use it as a lantern or a piece, separate piece. That was his idea. But that's why he was sent. And he was in the storms for many years. And I was like digging around to see what we had, because this is an in-house exhibition. That was the premise from the beginning. And I'm lucky to be organizing this, the collection that allows you to do that. And that's why I went outside the Greek Roman department. So I said, I want to see that, and we saw it. And actually the curator was very happy that it's on public view, and even scholars of Canova are more interested in it, because they forgot about it. Yes?
I was wondering on the sort of emplotment or the narratives, in the way the narrative is depicted in the Gorgon myth from archaic to later. As far as I remember, it's actually not an example in Giuliani's book on myth and image. And I just wanted to, is it possible that, I mean, in earlier pictures you have the images of the synoptic representations of the whole myth, for example in the famous Artemision gable from Corcyra, where the whole myth is summarized in one image, decapitation, and Pegasus jumps out.
And the other, actually, she was pregnant by Poseidon.
That's right, yeah.
So Chrysaor was the other offspring.
Yeah.
In our Lekithos, it's not represented, but in one of our Cypriot sarcophagi in the museum from Golgai, you can see both the horse, Pegasus, and Chrysaor springing out from the head.
And in later classical period, as we have it, or in the classical tradition later on, a man holding a decapitated woman's head, or a woman being about decapitated, signifies the whole myth. So the viewer is expected to know the story already. Is there a rise of a literary culture behind it, that people knew the canonical version of mythology?
I mean, of course, this already started in the Hellenistic period. Writers tried to rationalize Greek myth. It's part of the wider discussion, scholarly discussion in the time. So it's not, this myth is not the only example or the ones I mentioned here. So they try to find natural explanations why some certain myths exist. And among them, that's why they try to explain this monster. And Ovid, of course, is the one that comes a little later. It's the beginning of this was published probably the 880, the Metamorphosis. He sort of compiles all the story and creates this compendium of based on the theme of the Metamorphosis. The interesting thing is that, of course, we know these stories about the beautiful Medusa or the beautiful Scylla by Ovid, who is late, he's Roman. But as you saw in the earliest representations of the Medusa, at least, is already being more human and beautiful, come from the 5th century. There is no literary
version.
But we have that doesn't mean it didn't exist. There is a fragment in Pindar, one of his verses, saying that Medusa is fair and has beautiful cheeks. So that's the earliest representation. And of course, you have to bear in mind that these Roman mythographers were copying Attic 5th and 4th century mythographers, like Pherekides in Athens is the common source. So although we don't have the entire text, there were sources back there who explained, who told the stories. And this is what the Romans draw from. But but as you see, of course, vase painting itself, Attic vase painting itself, ceases by the end of the 5th century. And then we have the South Italian schools and then the one in the Celts. But then by the end of the 4th century, they don't do pictures anymore. So we have, that's why it's another reason that we don't have the full narrative, because they don't paint, they don't illustrate the pots with narrative scenes. That ends. So then we have other media. And of course, the Gorgonian itself is very powerful, it's very decorative too. That's why we have it portrayed more. And in Roman art, we have actually the one at the Met, I'm sure you've seen it, we have the paintings from Bosco Trecase, with the story of Perseus and Andromeda. That was the most popular episode of the whole myth. So the Romans liked that, so they focused on that. Not the earlier example of the decapitation. And I didn't have time here, but in Karatzi's series of frescoes, he shows that the decapitation, but then he shows Perseus holding the head of Medusa as armor, as a weapon, and petrifying the court of the king at Seriphos, like the one, the Polydect is the one, the evil king that sent fetch the gift. So I have time to go into detail, but yeah. Yes, please.
I'm interested in the versions of the stories where the hybrid female animal creature becomes more sympathetic, where Medusa is seen as a victim of an assault, or where the sirens are thought of as a sort of sad creatures. And I wonder what, could you tell us a bit more about that and what you think that, why does that happen? Why does that change happen? Is it related to generations before seeing these beautiful figures and then becoming more sympathetic? Is it related to how beauty on these actual objects are received? And or is it about something that's more broadly a social phenomenon happening whereby women are gaining more power or some kind of greater influence over how these figures are depicted and understood? Why does that happen, do you think, this shift?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
Because they cannot, figures like that, as I think I briefly mentioned at the beginning, we have to think of beauty in terms of the ancient Greeks. For them was meant ideal proportions, not necessarily by what we define beautiful. And it was based mainly on the male body, and of course the naked male, the nude. So there were athletes exercising the nude, so this is what the artists looked at and they copied. So the women were, the actual women were never exposed, because they were covered. They were secluded in the house. And that's why, but we're talking about artistic depictions, and in a way, these figures, as with everybody else, everything else, they cannot escape this pool of classical humanism. Because, first of all, they are partly human. And it's not only the females. I mean, I focus on them. Everybody knows about these creatures. Even a 5-year-old in the gardens, I was giving a tour for something else, and I mentioned Medusa, and he knew all the details. Which they don't know for all the Greek myths, but Medusa somehow is very fascinating to people even today. And I was doing a piece on the Sphinx, and then I realized, of course, I knew, but then I realized in a different way that most of these creatures in Greek myth are female. There are some male, but very, very few. And Pan, to go back to your question, not just the male, Pan also, if we have representations on objects of the 4th century, he also becomes more beautiful. Because it's part of the style, it's an artistic choice, it's an aesthetic choice. So you can see it that way, in terms of style, and you can also see it in a way of, if you want to look from a different perspective, you can see it as beauty as a form of control, as a form of controlling women, of controlling female sexuality. And, I mean, beauty industry today This is what it is. So in a sense, beauty becomes an ornament, and this is a way to control it. And that's why it's also, it's not, I think, it's interesting that from later on, we have, as we said before, the previous question, it becomes ornamental. So this Gorgonian and the other figures become more and more decorative. And for some people, it might be a stretch to connect it to the femme fatale, but it is. I mean, the same idea, I think I saw it here, persists, that it's the dangerous, the beautiful but dangerous, threatening woman. And it has to do with control.
Thank you very much.